Well, those are eternal questions. Nobody knows the answer. Nobody's going to have the final say on them. And so therefore, those are questions I'm not going to ask about. I'm not going to inquire for myself or for others about the meaning of being human, about the meaning of truth, justice, whatever it may be, because there are more definite questions that I know that I can at least achieve approximate answer to, or work or functional answer to. And I'm just curious how you think about that objection.
Yeah, so it's a fair objection, actually. So I would say that there's a obligation that an instructor or somebody who's trying to introduce people to philosophy has a certain obligation. I think every philosopher has faced this obligation and has tried to do it in their own way. And the obligation is exactly what you say, to convey or to communicate or somehow to open a path to philosophy. Dugan said it very beautifully in my interview with him on my YouTube channel, where he said, philosophy is like a castle with no doors. And, how do you enter a castle with no doors? How do you get into this realm? So I'll tell you one of the ways that I see as being the most effective in my experience. One of the most effective ways in my experience is when people get the relevance of something, for example, in Plato, when they see that a question that they have about today's world, or like an observation that they have about today's world, I've seen this a million times. Okay. That's also the thing that attracted me in some sense initially to philosophy. When you see that, or somebody tells you, or you just happen to discover that something that was written 2000 years ago can speak to something that's happening today as though it was written today, not just written today, but written today by a profound observer of the state of affairs and of human nature. And that it's somehow even truer than other things that are said today. That it kind of cuts through so much of the nonsense that's said today and gets to the heart of an issue. In my view, there are many, many points, for example, in Plato that do that. So it could be like, man, where do we even begin? The first page of the Republic tells you that there's a tension between compulsion and persuasion. And if you're like, wow, something that we see in politics all the time today is literally on the first page of like the book on politics in the Western world, maybe there's something else there that's interesting. Or an example that I've given in many conversations, even though maybe it seems trivial, maybe it doesn't, it never does in the conversations that I'm in. It might to people at first, which is why you always have to sort of find what resonates with people. In the Republic, where Socrates is talking about you lend a weapon to your friend, your friend lends a weapon to you, then he wants it back when he's not in his right state of mind. And that, for example, if you give it to him, he's going to go shoot up, he's going to go whatever, right? Commit some sort of heinous crime. And he asks you, do you have it? You do have it, but you lie to him, So it's like, is it always just to tell the truth? Here's apparently a very clear-cut example where the just thing is to lie. And now everybody today thinks about, is it ever correct to lie? Because they believe their governments are lying to them all the time. And they think that transparency in government communications is the primary virtue, Another thing is that example shows you there's more to justice than property rights. Because after all, the weapon is the other guy's property, right? But you're withholding it from him, and it's just to withhold it from him, so it seems. So it's like, again, that's not 500 pages into the Republic. That's like 2 or 3 pages into it. And suddenly it's raising questions about property rights, about the relationship between justice and truth telling. One of the videos I did on my channel, I don't know, maybe a year ago now, Jordan Peterson was posting that it's like, you always tell the truth, always tell the truth. You should always tell the truth. And I'm like, okay, well, do we have any great examples of a case where not telling the truth is the right thing to do? Oh yeah, like 2 pages into Plato's Republic. So that's just one example from one book. There are millions of them. The Symposium, Conversations about Love, the beautiful dialogues on beauty, where Socrates argues about what is beauty with a sophist. And it has my favorite wrong answer in all of Plato, where Socrates asks the other character, what is the beautiful? And the other guy's like, so sure he can answer. And he says, the beautiful is a beautiful woman, which is a great answer, but it's wrong. And they walk through all of, maybe the beautiful is the useful, maybe it's the pleasant. So the common theme I've had in all of the people who are like attracted to these authors eventually is that there's something that like anchors where they collapse the distance between the year, whatever year we're in now, what is it, 2023 and 2000 years ago, because they find a question that just collapses the difference in time. It's like,
Mhm.
Suddenly you're in the exact same conversation. I give you, okay, I turned 40 this year, December 31st. So I'm thinking about aging. And there's a conversation again in book one of the Republic where Socrates asks the father of the household, Cephalus, like, what's the best thing that you've learned from aging so far?
Right. Right.
So just example after example after example. It's a little bit later, I would say, that you go from that, the sort of like immediate questions that people can resonate with, gradually into the more apparently obscure dimensions of philosophizing, where you start thinking about the relationship of non-being to being. Like, it's not going to resonate with everybody as quickly if you start talking about being and beings and non-being and beingness. For some people, that's going to be like, no, thank you. I'd rather just go plant something in my garden, which is like hands-on and I can see it grow. But for sure, everybody thinks about love, beauty, justice, war, politics, lying, truth-telling, criminality. And maybe that's why like the such a foundational introduction to philosophy as is Plato's Republic is embedded in a reflection on the basic contours of political community as well. It's easier. It's an easier starting point for people than launching right into like the inner chambers.
Yeah. And so establishing sort of that personal connection initially, and then from using that sort of wedge to expand out into the deeper questions.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think so because everybody has something. I mean, even somebody who's never thought about philosophy or never read a philosopher, couldn't name a philosopher.
mhm.
I think that everybody has entertained quote unquote philosophical questions in a genuine way for themselves about life and death, about meaning, about the contrast between love of family and love of country. Like, we all have those questions, but a person needs to be shown, I think, that they have been articulated thoughtfully and intelligently by people we call philosophers in a way that can be helpful.
Yeah. And when you brought up closing the gap between the present and the past, one of the things that I always have to like, so philosophy is a lot of philosophy is remembering what you've forgotten. And one of the things that I always remember every time I go back to philosophy, I don't get to study it as much as I would like these days, is that there's always a moment where I'm reading a text and it feels like I'm communing with an old friend. And then I remember, oh yes, these texts are my old friends from the past. They are dead philosophers. And they are speaking to me in a way that, the very best of friends that I could have now, if they were here in this room, that I would like to engage with them. And that's just one of the little intimate joys, I'd say, of reading philosophy. That's outside of any, objective criteria for material gain or otherwise. It really is a kind of activity that is worth it for its own sake, and so therefore of the highest order.
Absolutely. It's I think it's true when you are trying to introduce people again in a new way, right? And people want to know what's in it for me, how's it useful, or right, what am I going to get out of it? One of the things I really learned from Strauss was that there's a quote unquote hedonistic defense of philosophy, that philosophy offers you a great pleasure. So it's like some people seek
Yeah.
pleasure, and if they can be convinced that philosophy is a source of pleasure, that'll attract them to it. But one of the things that's unique about philosophy is that it's like you don't it's accompanied by these incredible pleasures. That's true. You don't Pleasure is not the criterion that gets people into it, but then they discover that it has these specific charms, and that charm of communing with friends over thousands of years who feel like they can be closer to you than some people who are very close to you, because there is something intimate about philosophy in that way, and the pleasures are real and the charms are substantive. It's hard to convince people of that, I think, at the outset. It's something you have to kind of experience as you go into it. So one of the things about philosophy that doesn't, how could you put it, generalize, like you can't easily pitch it to everybody, is because it does withhold some of its greatest pleasures for the people who are like willing to meet it halfway, or willing to go where it is. Some things they'll go like exactly all the way where you are, and they'll just like drop the benefits in your lap or whatever.
Mhm.
Philosophy, people do have to make an effort, to like to get into it, to understand it, to move towards it. But by all accounts, it's worth it. You know, it's worth it not just for the way that it can have a practical benefit, but for these other sort of like harder to communicate, but much more genuine benefits, which are amazing. I mean, the experience, it's funny sometimes. For some people, like 500 years ago is a long time, which in some way it is, right? If it's like, wow, this thing's 500 years old. Like if you found a coin in your backyard that was 500 years old, that would probably be awesome. You know, some people find a coin that's like 50 years old, and that's awesome. So you read Plato. Plato's long time ago, you know, long time ago. And it's amazing. And then if you discuss it with people, that is so enriching as well. I mean, here's another book of Plato's, The Laws, a truly amazing work. Okay. The first line of this book, the Athenian stranger is asking, a guy from Athens is asking two other old Greeks, a Cretan and a Spartan, who do you say gave you your laws, a god or a man? Like the very first question of the book, do laws come from God or from man? What's the role of the divine in legislation? And how do we think about divinely revealed codes of law? And if God was a lawgiver, what would he try to aim at? Like all the virtues or some of the virtues? And they talk about war and civil war and foreign war. And it's like, if you're a thinking human being who cares about the human condition, this is like, I would rather find this than dig up 20 gold bars in my backyard or like a 500-year-old coin. This is the coin right here. It's like, it's a treasure. But people, again, it's not like a bar of gold. You sort of know, that you have it, or like a diamond, you sort of know, like or you scratch a lottery ticket and you know. But if you have a book of Plato in front of you, you may not know that you're sitting in front of a treasure, and the job of somebody who's introducing to people to philosophy is to like give that, gradually let them see that it's a book of treasure. And again, the easiest way that I know of is to connect it to something that they care about and show that it's a articulation of it that is profound.